Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling one of the most frustrating hurdles in reproductive health. It's the refractory thin uterine lining.
Right, the endometrium. This is the tissue that's absolutely essential for an embryo to implant, and sometimes it just stubbornly refuses to cooperate.
Even with all the standard medical treatments.
Yeah.
And that's when things can start to feel, well, pretty hopeless.
It really is a huge sticking point in an IVF cycle. We know that success is tied so directly to the quality and, of course, the thickness of that lining.
So what are clinics actually looking for? What's the target?
Well, clinically, they're aiming for at least 7 to 8 millimeters. But, the sweet spot, the real gold standard for an embryo transfer is closer to 10 millimeters.
And it's not just about how thick it is it? It's the structure, too.
Exactly. The texture, the pattern, it matters just as much. On an ultrasound, they're looking for this beautiful, organized structure called a trilaminar pattern.
The three-line sign.
That's the one. It's this visual confirmation that the lining has fully developed and is ready. Without that, even a thicker lining might not be receptive.
And when we say refractory, we mean this tissue is stuck. Maybe it's 6 millimeters, maybe less. Even after high-dose estrogen or other drugs meant to boost blood flow.
Yeah.
It's when you get that dreaded conversation. There's really not much else we can do.
And that's what our deep dive is all about today. What happens when you hit that wall? Our source is a patient newsletter from the Berkeley Center for Reproductive Wellness, founded by acupuncturist and herbalist Mike Berkeley.
Okay.
And it lays out the evidence for these non-pharmacologic approaches, specifically acupuncture and Chinese herbal medicine.
So our mission today is really to get past the anecdotes. We want to see if there's evidence of actual measurable physiological changes. Does this stuff really move the needle on thickness, structure, and blood flow?
Precisely. We're looking for the science, the quantifiable mechanisms that might make these a real option when the standard playbook runs out.
All right, let's start with the big one, acupuncture. It's used a lot in IVF for stress, but our source points to it as a tool specifically for this problem.
Yes, and as a safe one. The risk profile is, incredibly low. We're talking about maybe some minor temporary bruising at worst.
And this is where it gets really interesting, because we're not just talking about feelings. The source cites the highest level of evidence, randomized controlled trials, meta-analyses.
Yeah, and they're showing concrete physiological improvements. It's not just about feeling more relaxed. We're seeing verifiable changes inside the uterus.
So let's break down the data. What happens when acupuncture is done consistently, say 2 or 3 times a week from the start of the cycle?
First, you get a direct quantitative increase in thickness. The studies show an average gain of about plus 1.1 to 1.9 millimeters.
Wow, okay, that might not sound like a lot, but if you're stuck at 6 millimeters?
It's a game changer. That extra millimeter and a half can be the difference between canceling your cycle and actually getting to do a transfer. We're talking about a potential 20–30% increase in thickness.
That's huge. What about the second metric, the structure?
The structure improves, too. Patients show more frequent ideal trilaminar patterns on their ultrasounds. So you're not just getting a thicker lining, you're getting a better quality, more receptive one.
And the third piece of the puzzle is blood flow. How do they even measure that?
They use something called a Doppler ultrasound. It measures the resistance in the uterine arteries, looking at what's called the PI and RI, the pulsatility and resistivity index.
High numbers are bad, I'm guessing.
High numbers are bad. It means the arteries are tight, constricted, and blood isn't flowing freely. Acupuncture has been shown to consistently lower those numbers.
So the blood vessels are literally relaxing, letting more blood, more nutrients, more hormones get to where they need to go.
That's the idea. It's objective proof of better perfusion.
But here's the question. If a lining is truly refractory, meaning it's resisting the hormonal signals, why would just adding more blood flow work? Why isn't the estrogen enough on its own?
That's a fantastic question, and it's because it isn't just about flow. The main mechanism seems to be about helping the body release more nitric oxide, NO.
Nitric oxide, the vasodilation molecule.
Exactly. It's a powerful natural chemical that our bodies make. Acupuncture seems to help regulate the nervous system to make more of it available right where it's needed, acting as this internal vasodilator.
So you're not just pushing more hormones into the system, you're making the system itself more efficient at delivering them.
Right. And NO doesn't work alone. The source notes it works with VEGF, that's vascular endothelial growth factor, which helps build new microcirculation. But maybe the most critical effect is reducing what's called sympathetic overdrive.
The fight-or-flight response, the chronic stress of going through fertility treatment.
Yes. When you are constantly stressed, your body diverts blood away from what it sees as non-essential organs. And in a survival state, the uterus is on that list.
So the stress itself can physically tighten the arteries that feed the lining.
It can. And it doesn't matter how much estrogen you're taking if the delivery route is clamped shut. Acupuncture helps flip the switch to that relaxed parasympathetic state, which physically releases the tension in those blood vessels.
What's so fascinating there is that the mechanism using nitric oxide to dilate blood vessels is basically how drugs like sildenafil work for this.
It's a very similar pathway, but with acupuncture, you're getting the body to do it itself through its own regulatory systems, which avoids potential systemic side effects. The data from large IVF trials backs this up. For these really tough cases, that extra 1.2 millimeters in better blood flow led to better implantation rates.
That's a really compelling case. So let's begin the second piece of this integrative approach, Chinese herbal medicine, or CHM.
CHM is often used right alongside acupuncture, and again, we're not just going on tradition. The source points to studies in journals like Complementary Therapies in Medicine and PLSS1 that looked at this specific issue.
And what are the numbers showing when herbs are added to the mix?
The results are comparable, sometimes even a little stronger than acupuncture alone. We're seeing an increase in endometrial thickness of about plus 1.1 to 2.0 millimeters.
Okay, so a similar boost in thickness.
A similar boost, but CHM seems to add other layers of benefit. It can improve overall cycle quality, things like more stable basal body temperatures, better cervical mucus, which suggests a more balanced hormonal environment overall.
And did they see the same improvements in blood flow?
Yes, significant improvements in subendometrial blood flow. And a few of the trials actually reported higher clinical pregnancy rates when CHM was combined with IVF versus IVF alone.
So what's the mechanism here? If we talked about nitric oxide for acupuncture, how are the herbs working? Are they just doing the same thing?
They share the goal, but they use different biochemical tools. So from a Western viewpoint, many of these herbal formulas also support those NO and VEGF pathways, but they also seem to have a key secondary function, reducing local inflammation in the uterus.
And chronic inflammation would be a major barrier to
A
growth.
huge barrier. It can disrupt all the delicate hormonal signaling. So certain herbs have these known anti-inflammatory properties that create a calmer, more receptive environment for an embryo.
And then there's the traditional Chinese medicine perspective, which is how the formulas are actually put together.
Exactly. From a TCM perspective, a thin lining is often seen as a blood deficiency or stagnation. The formulas are designed to nourish and build blood, which, in modern terms, corresponds to giving the body the raw materials it needs for endometrial growth.
Right. Now, a big question for anyone listening is going to be safety. You're taking these powerful IVF drugs. How do you make sure that herbs don't interfere?
That is absolutely critical, and the source really stresses this. It has to be managed by a trained, licensed professional who specializes in this, and crucially, who is coordinating with your reproductive endocrinologist. In the trials, the rate of adverse effects was really low, under 2%, but that's because it's being properly monitored and prescribed.
Okay, that brings us to the practical side of things. If someone comes to a clinic with this problem, what does an integrative plan actually look like on a weekly basis?
It's always customized, but the framework is pretty consistent. First, acupuncture, and it's frequent. We're talking 2 to 3 times a week.
And the focuses.
Laser focused on uterine blood flow, hormonal balance, and, managing that stress response to stop the sympathetic overdrive.
And the herbs.
The patient gets a personalized herbal formula, usually a tea or granules, and it's tailored not just to the thin lining diagnosis, but to their specific TCM pattern. The herbalist absolutely has to have a full list of all their IVF medications to avoid any interactions.
Let's talk about that coordination, because you've got 2 different medical teams. How does that work?
For it to work, you have to share data. The acupuncturist needs to see the latest blood work, the E2, the progesterone, and the ultrasound reports.
So they know exactly where the lining is at.
Right, so they can adjust their treatment to support what the RE is doing, not work against it. It becomes truly collaborative. The acupuncturist is basically tending to the soil while the RE focuses on planting the seed.
Makes sense. Okay, a quick practical question, Pam. What about the needles?
It's almost never an issue. The needles are hair thin. Honestly, the treatments are so relaxing that most patients fall asleep. It becomes the calmest part of their week.
And the final big question, the timeline. If you've had cycles canceled over and over, how long do you need to commit to this before you might see that extra millimeter?
Well, everyone is different, but clinical experience suggests that for these really stubborn cases, it can take 1 to 3 cycles of consistent treatment to really see a meaningful shift.
So patience is key.
Patience and consistency, yes. It takes time to regulate those underlying systems.
It's just such a clear evidence-based breakdown for people who felt like they were at the end of the road.
So what's the bottom line? Look, acupuncture and CHM aren't miracle cures. They guarantee nothing. But the evidence shows they are low-risk tools that can create real, measurable physiological changes in the uterine environment.
The key takeaway for you listening is that this isn't just about feeling better. It's about quantifiable improvements to blood flow and structure, tapping into the body's own regulatory pathways when the drugs alone aren't enough.
Exactly. And let me leave you with one final thought to mull over. Given this really strong link between stress, that sympathetic overdrive, and physically constricted blood vessels, how much untapped potential is there in therapies that focus on restoring the body's own internal balance? Not just for fertility, but for our health overall. Something to think about, or maybe even bring up with your doctor.